I've thought of a term to describe what I've thought of for a long time, and that term is the people's veto. Years ago, I was selected for jury duty. There was a man who was caught doing construction without a license, and the whole courtroom debate centered around entrapment, since apparently it was a sting where some undercover cop asked for construction work to be done under the table, and all the arguments were about whether this constituted entrapment and if one can be prosecuted for a crime that a government agent entrapped someone into. For me, I didn't care. I opposed the law, so I found him not guilty. Period. I nullified. And I told all the other jurors I didn't care what they said. I didn't care what the law was. I nullified. I vetoed the law. I told them I'll spend as long as it takes. Back then, I didn't have a day job to go back to. Told them none of you are going to outlast me. 9 hours of deliberation, hung jury, he got off. I didn't even want to be on the jury at first. I was hoping that I would get bounced, but as soon as I heard the opening arguments, and as soon as I began to hear what this case was about, there was no question what I was going to do. Now, this behavior, this people's veto, is used for evil as well. For example, cities just ignoring federal law and allowing non-citizens to vote, ignoring federal gun law and just grabbing people's guns. By their actions, they ignore federal law, they just act, they just do. You talk, they do. And it's like, we're ignoring the law, we're just going to do what we want. If you don't like it, well, strap it up and come at us if you think you're hard enough. That's the people's veto. It's not about majority support. Majority support can go suck a dick. The law, the Constitution, well, you like that document, you go have fun with it. And if our people, the sort of Tucker Carlson populist conservative crowd, started acting this way, that opens up so many options for us. We don't have to win national elections. We can just form a block of states and say, we are controlling our borders. Citizenship must be proven by anyone wanting to enter, say, Wyoming, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, and they must prove that they were not recipients of the diversity lottery or descendants thereof. And if the federal government tries to settle Somalis in Idaho, we will deny them Idahoan citizenship, and we will deport them to Oregon or Washington or some surrounding state. That's just an example of this mentality, because going through the courts and going through all the Pharisees of Congress, who have all these farcical notions about the nature of the struggle that they're in, who think that this is just some sort of career advancement, I'm being a senator kind of guy thing. They're unaware of the nature of the struggle that they're in. Dealing with these people won't work. We must simply act. Ignore the courts, ignore the legislature. Hypothetically, if I were to run for office, I would openly state that I am a man of action, meaning I will clean out the bureaucracy and staff it with those willing to carry out my agenda and government agents who are willing to ignore the courts, certainly ignore the press, and ignore the legislatures, to enact the people's veto, to simply do. This is not radical. The establishment races are already doing this on many laws. There are countless instances of cities ignoring federal gun law, federal immigration law, laws limiting eminent domain, and they just do what they want. And it works, because the only way to counter the people's veto is to send in some sort of military force against the states or municipalities who are enacting the people's veto. And it's much easier for a judge to just scribble some words, to say words, call it an injunction, and then it is up to either federal security forces or the military itself to march into Cheyenne and enforce an unpopular law on an ostensibly sovereign state. It's one thing for a judge to scribble something down, it's quite another to strap it up and enforce it. And this is also why I support the Electoral College. oh, Wyoming gets too many electoral votes on a population basis. Our attitude needs to not be, well, the founders didn't want one region to dominate another region of the country just because they have, say, a 60% majority. You know, that's all well and good. Those sorts of logical arguments are all well and good, but the correct response to anyone whining about the disproportionate vote share granted by the Electoral College is, go choke on shit, California. We are going to do everything we can to enforce our will wherever we can. We don't care about you, and we don't care about the citizens of California. We're not going to be free market chumps anymore. We are going to get free shit from the federal government, and you are going to pay for it. Because that's what they've been doing to us for over 50 years. They've been ignoring the law and just doing what they want. The courts even punished the Southeast U.S. for segregation, even though segregation was legal at the time. One key concept of the founding of the U.S. was that there would be no corruption of blood. But the current Democrats are pushing for slavery reparations. Reparations for what? They were slaves. They weren't citizens. And slavery was legal at the time. But they don't care. Prior legality doesn't matter to them. And they will punish you for what are in theory the sins of the father. They believe in corruption of blood. The people's veto is a word for a new mentality. I saw some Vox or HuffPo, same thing, or some other establishment racist post on how federal grants were going disproportionately to states and areas within states that supported Trump, and how Trump's tariffs disproportionately benefited states that voted for him. And this was meant to guilt Trump supporters or some bullshit and say, oh, you guys claim to be for the free market, but it looks like you're socialists here. Look, if that's socialism, then I'm a socialist. Let's stop being chumps. It's always been that if we win, we get to endure the rigors of the free market. And if they win, they get all sorts of free goodies and protections and sinecures. This has to stop. Take away their goodies. Make them pay for our goodies. Kick them out wherever we can get away with it. And just do what we want. Judges can make noise. I didn't write the law. I never agreed to it. I ignore it. I nullify it. I enact the people's veto. And if they don't like it, well, strap it up and come at us if you think you're hard enough. Now me, I'm just some guy with a YouTube channel and a lot of free time. So all I can do is express this mentality, and hopefully it filters through to people with the ability to enact it. But the first step is to establish this mentality. 3 arrows up. Strike up and against what is really the far right. In a functional sense, we are the left. We are the working class. We are the third estate, pitted against the professor priesthood and the ruling elites. Some shithead might come in and say, well, actually, historically, 3 arrows means opposition to Nazism, capitalism, and monarchism. Okay, well, we're not living in historically, we're living in 2019. And what all those turds with the 3 arrows logo down, what they do now is act as shock troops for the establishment. Their logo is fitting. They punch down and against the third estate, against the real left. And as they have ascended to power, corporations have consolidated like never before. Corporate control over free speech is greater than ever before. They don't need company stores anymore. They just have you herded into their monopolistic corporations like Amazon. They don't need the Pinkertons. They'll just import scabs from every corner of the globe. The middle class, defined as workers with stocks and companies, i.e. the real practical way in which we actually achieve worker control of the means of production, that is being destroyed as these fake leftists have gained power. In fact, they hate the true way in which worker control of the means of production was practically achieved. They hate the middle class, largely out of a racial animus. A large and powerful middle class of workers with stock, workers who own the means of production, in a people's economy that strictly circumscribed monopolies and prevented the mass importation of labor that would weaken the bargaining power and undo all of the progress that has been done in creating a real people's economy in the United States. And that is precisely what these people are doing. These fake leftists call themselves bread tube. And that's such a great name for them. They are bred for conformity, bred to have an authoritarian view of knowledge, bred to be terrified of any social ostracism, bred to be the shock troops and intellectual bodyguard for the corporate establishment, and for all of their work, they're given scraps of bread by the establishment. A fitting name for these golem wormtongues, these ultra-capitalists, who farcically call themselves socialists, who champion a monopoly of Sanhedrins to define what is true, where truth is established through the socially constructed authorities at their place and time in history and what they happen to say. They rage against any expression of white Christianity and are champions for the supremacy of Islamic law, and they promote institutional racism on a scale that would make the old segregationists look like pikers. It's no accident that whites from New England are the most authoritarian in their thinking and the most in line with establishment racism. They are the descendants of witch and warlock burners.